really emphasized excessively the his gender identity situation, and I wonder if I felt that there was a sense of judgment there, that you were maybe consciously or not belittling him by giving such emphasis, which seemed to me personally to be inappropriate for the message that the film was. I wondered if you did that purposely, or whether you maybe disagreed that you did it at all, or.
Well, let's talk about it. It's a great comment and question, because it was something we gave a lot of thought and consideration to, and because ultimately his gender crisis, identity crisis, it was not what motivated him to make a moral decision, which is what he made, and become the whistleblower that was responsible for all the leaks that occurred. However, for us, and I'd love to hear what people thought of that opinion that you just expressed, is shared by others. It's not my interpretation of the film, but I respect that that was your experience. It was not our intention in any way to overemphasize that, and if anything, we thought we were meticulous at actually not overemphasizing it, but obviously for you we did, and that's your valid experience. But that is Bradley's life experience. That is what Bradley was going through. It wasn't just the gender identity issue. It was, it was this young, effeminate kid, gay soldier, gay man in the wrong place, in the absolute worst place on earth that he ever should have been in. He joined the Army hoping for a brighter future. And a kid who had been bullied his whole life suddenly was being bullied in an extreme that dwarfed anything that had ever happened to him in his life. And he had gone through a lot, growing up in Crescent, Oklahoma, and everything they went through. And those pressures of being in that army, in the don't ask, don't tell army, and in the macho climate, and at forward operating base Hammer, and people were amazed that he wasn't kicked out when after he flunked out basic training before getting the second chance. Everyone we talked to was absolutely stunned. And by the way, the reason that they didn't kick him out is because we have a volunteer army, right? And it's not the best and the brightest, it's the volunteers. And he's a very bright kid, and they needed that brain. And so they gave him more chances than any other kid they would have given, even though in every way he didn't fit the mold. But they needed him, and so they made him an intelligence analyst. But for us, it wasn't our intention to overemphasize it. Did people feel that was overemphasized? You did, but
no, I didn't. And speaking as a gay man, I felt that his personal story and what he was driven to do were inextricably linked, but there was no causal, there was no causality there. He was isolated, which may have, which certainly gave him more time to ponder the information he was being given, and what steps he might take. But I don't feel that the film judges him at all.
yeah.
Yeah. First, compliments on the film. It's wonderful. It's it was never for a documentary over 2 hours. It's so complicated. I was never bored. That was a compliment.
Thank you.
I would say to the viewer, I leave first of all feeling that the Swedish woman is completely credible. So I don't know I don't know how that.
Can we pause on that? So everyone heard the comment about that your takeaway was that the Swedish woman is incredibly credible. Did everyone feel that way?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would say that there were some things that gave me, I had some qualms. First, that Fox News is being shown as limited. Because there's so much on Fox News that if this movie is shown in France or somewhere where they don't necessarily understand may or may not be aware that it looks like this is almost the entirety of American media.
World knows.
No, the world doesn't know. The world doesn't know. The world doesn't know. The second was that probably the issue of when you show him as queer, as possibly bi, as gay, and the link with Adrian Lamo, then there seems a reason why this is there, and it made sense to me. But his identification as a trans woman, it just seemed sort of there. It didn't seem like it was leading anywhere, and it struck me possibly as Korean, as interesting, but finally as Korean because since it's
Would
not
have you
really-
left it out?
What? Well, we spoke earlier that he failed basic training. Did anyone hear that he failed basic training in the text of the film? Is this when you mentioned it? I'd never heard it in the film itself.
No, I heard that.
Well, it's there. Again, there's
There's a lot of
there's a lot of information.
No, I'm not saying
Yeah.
it was. I'm just. It seems sort of like floating and out there, and it didn't like most of the stuff that's in the film pays off. It seems to go to a point, and since he doesn't have and when he has a boyfriend, and he seems to be going. This guy in Boston, he's going to the party. He certainly looks more like June Allison than he looks like June Harlow, but everyone's kind of. That's fine. Guys obviously doesn't know film as well as most people in this room. But that at least it went to a point of something. I think that the issue of him being a trans woman, possibly being a trans woman, because we don't know that even incarceration has been asking, is he going through therapy, is anything being done with it? We don't know. And then because it's just hanging there. I don't want to say that it is Korean, but it gave me a qualm that it wasn't as neatly dealt with or introduced in a way that didn't seem Korean.
Well, I mean, again, a
That's a
totally fair
personal-
reaction. It certainly has a key.
It makes him seem troubled rather than that this is a positive.
But well, it's a good question. I mean, what I do think is going on, I'd say a couple things, and I'll probably get myself in trouble by saying this stuff, but I believe that Bradley was, like, the underlying psychological structure of Bradley Manning was breaking down, okay? And he was in an ongoing act of kind of destroying the identity of Bradley Manning, and it was getting more and more self-destructive in his actions, his behavior, and that's what was happening when he was in Iraq. And until, he went down a path of total self-destruction and self-betrayal, by confessing everything that he did to Adrian Lamo, a stranger he had never met. Part of that story is both the person he was and who he was trying to destroy, and the person he was trying to become, which was, a new gender in this exchange. It was, and it wasn't by chance that when he had his first leave from Iraq and he's home in January of 2010, he's trying out his new identity as a woman, and that was a huge thing for him. It's like whether or not he was going to be recognized or not. We got into some of it, not all of it, and to your point, because we actually felt it wasn't germane to overstate it, because in some ways, without it being the intention of the filmmakers, it starts to be the potential interpretation of the viewer that it's because he was going through his gender crisis that he did these things, or that was responsible, and clearly that's not our intention. So just to I want to state that. But he was going through that. He did, take the train from D.C. to Boston for the first time, trying it out. The conductor, in fact, called him out and said, "Mr. Manning." But it's like he was trying this out, and it was very important to him, and he was dead set. I don't know what's happening to him in prison now. In terms, I don't believe he has access to any drug therapy or hormones, but he, that was, we weren't able to get the photo that was attached to the letter that he sent to his master sergeant when he basically was saying, I can't do this anymore. He was going by Brianna Manning at the time and not Bradley Manning, and and that was the new identity that he was attaching himself to. All of that was coming out of just a crisis, a personal crisis of loneliness, of isolation, of bullying, of marginalization, which started when he was a child, and it followed him and haunted him his whole life until, you know, he broke down. And it's part of the breakdown. It is, and
Would you make the Adrian Lamo thing not seem like a breakdown, but seem like he needs a human connection, like every human being does?
he did, but,
Makes it
but
seem like a very
well, he's still a
normal
human being
thing,
as
not
he's
an
going
everyday
through it.
trouble thing. I think he
Well,
really and says that it's a really human thing that he reached out to Adrian Lamo.
It's a very human thing. I mean, good or bad, it's a very human thing, that's for sure.
Julian Assange is a great movie, and he's a great personality. Is there any other one or two things you want to add about him that we should know?
You mean that isn't in there? No, I think we put in what we had to say about him.
Including his sweet dance moves.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful bit of footage. Yes?
I'm assuming you got all of the text from Adrian that Bradley had sent him. I'm assuming he
Yeah.
gave you all that text.
No, I'll tell you how we got it in a second.
Yeah,
Go on.
I'm curious to know how you got it, and
Yeah.
if it was through him, what you think his
No.
motives may have been, or if it was.
Yeah, it was not through Adrian.
Otherwise, how
Yeah.
was it obtained?
Yeah, so it's really a fascinating
Because
story.
it's really the centerpiece of the
Right.
film for me.
Yeah. Did everyone hear the question about it? It was, where did we get the text that goes through the whole film of the chats between Adrian Lamo and Bradley Manning? The answer is that when Wired broke the story, Kevin Paulson, who's interviewed in this, and Kim Zetter from Wired covered the story. They had excerpts from the chats when they first broke the story. And that's what was covered. And like everything that is in the 24-hour news cycle, the world media just kind of flocked to it, covered it, burned it out, and that was what everybody thought of as the chats. And they were a microcosm of what we have in here. 6 months later, Wired published the full chats.
Where did they get them, do you know? From
They
Adrian?
got them probably from Adrian, who's very close to Kevin Paulson, who's the writer for an editor at Wired. And nobody covered it, and nobody took notice of it. Like it was crazy. And when we read through the entirety of the chats, it was an incredible Shakespearean drama, and we were totally drawn to it. And that was when the idea hatched that maybe that could be a thread of how to tell the story. So it's out there. You can find the entire chats.
How did Adrian and Bradley first connect? I mean, what brought the two of them together? Because they're just in the chat room, or do you know?
Well, Bradley reached out to Adrian.
Knowing him, knowing of him?
I mean, Adrian was has some notoriety as a hacker.
Okay,
He served time he served in prison, and
right, okay.
he's a very controversial figure. He was a controversial figure before this whole thing happened. He was suspected of being a spy for the government, all kinds of things. Like he's got a whole weird legend about him. But Bradley had heard about it. But what Bradley had seen Adrian trumpet WikiLeaks and solicit, interest for WikiLeaks or donation or something. I forgot exactly what it was. It's actually mentioned, and that was what provoked it. Prior, by the way, which we don't get into in the film, prior to reaching out to Adrian, Bradley reached out to a writer who is a gay writer who he was interested in telling a story to, and he reached out to another person, and beside those people online, those were internet connections, he also, within the confines of the Army base, was basically trying to out his secret as well. Bradley could not abide by not being recognized for what he had done.